What's up, gamers? It's the Legend27 here, coming at you live with some Civilization 6. Can't wait to see what happens. You know, I actually started playing Civ back in the Civ Revolution days on the PS3. Now that's a classic. Anyway, I'm playing as Teddy Roosevelt this time, because America, but he's actually pretty good at cultural victories, so we'll see. Honestly, I'm not really sure how I want to win just yet, so let's try to have some fun, you know? First things first, we gotta find ourselves some resources, you know, spread our borders, plop some new cities down, and eventually we're gonna get to do some cool natural park building. You know, that's Teddy Roosevelt's whole gimmick, is putting national parks and, wait, is that someone's border? Who is that? Let's go check that. Civilization 6 is the 6th title in a series spanning 14 games, including the upcoming Civilization 7. And what is now becoming a fairly competitive genre, what with the likes of Humankind, Aura, and Millennia, Civilization has managed to reign supreme despite this growing competition. You might think, well, who the fuck has the balls to take Sid Meier's golden crown? And the answer might not surprise you. Humankind, developed by the dudes at Amplitude, famous for other 4X strategy games like Endless Space and Endless Legends series, owned wholly by Sega of all companies. Aura, History Untold, is another take on the historical 4X, and, believe it or not, is an Xbox first-party exclusive. That's right, I bet you didn't know that Xbox actually does make first-party exclusives in the year of 2024. Now didn't ya? Available on Steam. And Millennia. Who could forget Millennia? Everyone, apparently. Developed by the strategy gods Paradox Interactive, famous for badass grand strategy epics like Hearts of Iron, Victoria, Crusader Kings, and the most obscene DLC model you've ever seen.
It costs how much to play the full game?
In the last couple of years, we've seen some pretty big names vying for this niche market space. And if I may be so bold as to crown a winner, I'd say Civ is still on top, by like a lot. And why is that? What is Civ doing so differently that the others can't compete? Paradox and Amplitude have been making strategy games, competent strategy games, dare I say better strategy games, than Civ has ever done. But when pitted against them in a one-on-one, they just don't deliver. Maybe it's just an experience thing. You know, Civ is a long-running franchise in a very specific, historically focused strategy game, whereas Amplitude and Paradox have always focused on, you know, specific time periods, encompassing moments in time. Sometimes even fictional spaces, where you aren't bound by, you know, history or historical accuracy. Or maybe it's got something to do with something I like to call aura. That's swag for the millennials out there. Or maybe it isn't. I couldn't really care less, but I do have something to say about what I think Civ is doing different. It's not fancy graphics or cultural representation. It's not even fun or, heaven forbid, good multiplayer support. It's aura. Let me explain. Your player character in every Civ game is always going to be one of these charismatic leaders from world history. I made a joke about Swole Gilgamesh earlier, but his actual model from the game is filled with character and detail. I didn't know diddly squat about anthropology or how people dressed up in the year 2000 BC? What? But right from the get-go, I can see Gilgamesh's simple yet welcoming design, complementing his playstyle as the friendly ally Gilgamesh. He's the oldest of the Civ leaders, to the point where he borders on being a legendary figure. Attention to detail goes a long way. Civ protagonist Gandhi has his glasses reflect some sort of light when it's pointed at the player. It's like he's being filmed, or the sun is right above him. Teddy Roosevelt whips out the North Atlantic accent like we wouldn't notice, and of course, who could forget whatever the heck Cleopatra is trying to do to me.
Jinek Cleopatra hena henemeset ir.
Was she checking me out? Did this person who actually existed catcall me in my historical strategy game? The clitter-clatter of Qin Shi Huang's apparel and jewelry? Queen Victoria sounds like she's moments away from turning me into a British colony?
You tread on dangerous waters in the face of England and her loyal colonies.
I could go on. Compare this to other games I've mentioned. Aura comes with its own leaders, but They're devoid of charisma. Millennia couldn't be bothered with leaders, instead electing to go the Age of Empires route of just flat out nations being your representative. It's not even as deep as Age of Empires, at least that game has visual representations for your nations, or visual characterizations for your nations. You'll have unique units, and the buildings will all look different, like they belong to the country you picked, but you wouldn't know what country you're up against just from looking at it in Millennia. Millennia instead decides to build its gameplay around characterization. There's no aesthetic or aura difference here, because regardless of whether you pick a shogunate or an imperial dynasty or a republic, your country will look just like your neighbors at pretty much every angle you look at it. Your only reminder that you're a shogunate will be the occasional spawning of samurai, but this isn't tied to whether you pick Japan or not. You could end up as the Americans and also pick shogunate, so you could technically have an American shogunate with American samurai, which should be badass by every conceivable metric, but is instead just numbers on a screen. It's purely for roleplay. And I make a point about this with Millennia because Civ does this too. You can go an American monarchy, for instance, and there's really very little in aesthetic difference here. But Millennia is built around this system, whereas for Civ, it's an unimportant feature. Gameplay in Civ is tied to your leader or country before you start the game. Millennia's is tied to your in-the-moment gameplay, but still somehow falls short in making that apparent. Visually, aesthetically, orally. Don't say that. Don't say that out loud. At least Ara tried, though there's not much there to see. You know, characters here are stiff, serious, they barely have voice lines, and hardly react when good or negative things happen to them. This is the declaration of war for two identical characters in both games. Take a listen.
Χάιτε σε λάδο στρατιάι, σε περιμένουσι μετά των ασπασμάτων.
Here's another one. This time it's what happens if you eliminate this player.
Uqinisile. Uqedile ukubusa kwami. Kodwa usazongibona emaphusheni akho.
No, wait, Aura doesn't have defeat animations. They'll just disappear. Clearly Microsoft thought that this would be an inconsequential feature. Who cares about the way characters look and talk? What matters is the on-the-ground gameplay. Yet somehow, I still come back to Civ 6 to this day. Got 1,000 hours on that damn game. Meanwhile, Aura isn't worth buying. Got that shit on Game Pass. Let's jump to Humankind. Some of these models are based on real historical figures too, just like Civ. But most of the time, you're going to be dealing with generic models created by the game or by other players. And character creation is a really cool idea, especially if it's for your own player character. I've never seen one of these games have you, citizen of Uzbekistan, sitting in your gaming chair trying to run a country against the likes of Napoleon or George Washington. Humankind kind of lets you do that. Having yourself be represented by yourself adds to some of the potential roleplay aspects in these games. It's not me, Emperor Napoleon, conquering the world. It's me, myself. I, doing the conquering, the pillaging, the murder. Unfortunately, Humankind has you stuck with some bogus characters. They don't do, say, or look like much at all. Every character is tied to the same set of animations, facial expressions, and occasionally voice lines.
Do something clever today. Sign this treaty.
What did she say?
Do something clever today.
Do something.
Sign this treaty.
Do something what?
Fascinating.
Is that a command? Is that advice? Who says that? Do something clever today. Who talks like that? What's crazy is that the fellas at Amplitude already nailed this in a previous game. Endless Space 2 hosts a plethora of badass, mostly non-human leaders, each with their own themes and motifs. My personal favorite is Horatio. He's basically this ultimate life form turned hive mind, kinda, that values beauty and perfection above all else. Horatio will say the most out-of-pocket shit you'll ever hear and still pair it with this dope-ass theme song.
Make Horatio great again.
I beg your pardon?
Speaking of theme songs, did you know that the Civ 4 theme song Baba Yetu got played at the United Nations one time?
Baba yetu yetu liye binguni yetu yetu amina Baba yetu yetu liye jina lako litukuzwe. Baba yetu yetu liye binguni yetu.
In my opinion, a game soundtrack is the single most important thing to selling a game on vibes alone. Obviously, gameplay is king and all, but god dang it, if a solid soundtrack doesn't seal the deal, I don't know what else does. Story? Civ 6 does this thing where every character you play has their own set of songs. They have different versions for different eras you're in, and you even hear a snippet of each every time you interact with them in diplomacy menus. Except instead of being tied to a leader, Civ 6's soundtrack is tied to the nation you've picked. Doesn't matter if you pick Kublai Khan or Genghis Khan, you'll always hear Mongolian throat singing. Though, likewise, if you pick Chinese Kublai Khan, you'll only hear the corresponding Chinese OST, tied to him and to the other China leaders like Wu Zetian. Apologies for the mispronunciation. These aren't particularly catchy songs, but you definitely get into the mood of the Civ you're playing. Scotland has that classic bagpipe melody that plays in every movie or TV show. You know the one. I wonder if the Scots are sick of it by now. Spain gets a cool Spanish guitar. And the Zulu gets my personal favorite, if for unfortunate reasons. Some of these songs border on the stereotypical, but in a game about nations duking it out, it kind of makes sense to grab famous, borderline generic songs for each nation. It doesn't need to be good, it just needs to feel right. And ain't that what vibes are? The crazy thing here is I actually don't have much to criticize here for the other games. These guys do it great. Humankind's soundtrack is fantastic, if only undone by how great some of their other games are by comparison. Aura has this really cool, mellow starting music every time you boot up the game that just gives you this insane sense of wonder. I'm starting out an empire for the ages. What wonders and challenges will I discover? Millennia's soundtrack is also pretty good, for the same reason as Humankind, in that Paradox and Amplitude have both showcased some outstanding music for their games. And these two games don't really live up to those peaks, but only because games like Stellaris, Endless Space sell that atmosphere so well with their bangers by comparison. Characterization comes back here again to make that difference. The Mongolian throat singing when you play Mongolia, the Spanish guitar as you play Spain, and the sound of an unstoppable force making its way through the galaxy is only possible because the game's characters and themes match the accompanying creative aesthetic, music, and art. Civ is the only one, in my opinion, among these history-based 4X games that raises the bar on all of these dimensions, leaving the other three squarely behind. My final point here is going to be about the game itself, not the gameplay, but what you're looking at 90% of the time. Characters and leaders and music is cool and all, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not staring at these models 90% of the time, and sometimes I've got something else playing in the background, so the game's map is really what I'm interacting with the most. It's the visual representation of your world, your empire, your country, and the game for most players. That and a lot of menus. Civ 6 initially caught a lot of flack for its new visual style. The leaders themselves weren't really well received till players finally got their hands on them. The one thing that definitely felt like a step back were the cool backgrounds that came with the characters back in Civ 5. These added a ton of character too, and it's a shame that they won't even be back for Civ 7, but I think the sacrifice for stronger individual portraits in Civ 6 worked really good for me. That said, players still didn't vibe with the new cartoony aesthetic of the game. It's almost as if gamers learned nothing from that whole Wind Waker debacle back in the day. Never mind that these games will probably still look great in a decade. Okay, fine, you want the realistic graphics so bad? Fine. Humankind, show them what you're made of. On History Untold, do your thing. Okay, maybe I went too far on the Civ glizzy glazing there for a second. These games actually do look kind of fire. I'm gonna give it to Aura and Humankind here. These games are genuinely gorgeous to stare at. The way your empires grow from tiny one-city centers to sprawling, industrial, economic zones is genuinely addicting. By the time you've reached the modern era, you might have wound up with an empire not too dissimilar to one you might find in the real world or in the near future. This is only made better by the inclusion of some breathtaking art by the folks at Amplitude. The character models in this game might not be too cool to look at, but look at the way Amplitude has chosen to represent some of the mightiest civilizations and cultures in world history, incorporating some of the most awe-inspiring elements from each of these countries into portraits that instantly capture the essence of that nation in just a few pixels. Wonders, both natural and man-made, pop out of the map like a pop-up book and make you want to incorporate it into this massive nation of yours. It's so well done. Though Aura doesn't have natural wonders, the game is unique in that it lets you zoom into your city all the way into your populations to see what your citizens are up to. It's not that interesting, mind you, it gets old pretty quick, but the fact that I can look and see how individual houses grow, how industry builds, farms, carriages, people moving around, it's kind of cool. It's really immersive. I can get a real sense of how my nation is progressing through the ages and through various settings if I decide to go a different culture or two. The closest that Civ gets to this is when certain tiles connect with one another, like farms or ranches, but that's about it. As the games drag on, the map is flooded with improvements, districts, wonders, units to the point of clutter. It feels like a face full of acne. I don't even want to look at it. The subtle, clean, focused way that Aura and humankind present themselves feels more like a well-groomed, clean-shaving, moisturized supermodel going down a runway. Meanwhile, Millennia gets none of this right, instead doubling down on the importance of tiles themselves, which only further emphasizes this visual pollution. It's no wonder that the best moments of the Civ games end up being those first few eras, when there's still space and civilization to discover. And once your borders start touching and it feels like there's no room to grow, the game slows to a halt. The same idea applies to other games, but what makes Civ work for me is the people behind those borders. The leaders. They implore me to keep going. I can get behind conquering Philip of Spain because he denounced me, because I converted one of his cities, because he converted one of my cities while sending the entire Spanish Inquisition after me with that smug expression of his. And there you go, that's the point. I'm now involved in a three-way war with Spain because his cities look yummy, and he dissed me earlier. Rude. Civilization masters personality and charm like none of these games do. I've got issues with Civ. As much as I like the leaders, interacting with them is extremely limited, diplomacy sucks ass, and the AI is even worse. But I'll put up with it because the characters make me feel something. They make me react to their personalities, to their interactions, their gesturing, their denouncements. I believe it. I'm sold by the effort on display. Civ 7 looks to be a solid evolution on the core Civilization formula, but if there's any indication on these early trailers, they've taken notes on what works in these other games, like map clutter, elevated terrain, and switching cultures. That seems to be what Civ 7 is all about and what they're changing going forward. Something along the way got lost. Characters in general look worse than they did in Civ 5. There's really not much detail in the character models, and some of them just look unfinished, but it might just be the Switch gameplay, not necessarily how it looks by the time we all get our hands on it. Time will tell if Civ 7 lives up to that Civ 6 aura, but it might just be a case that Firaxis struck lightning. Maybe this could be an opportunity for their competitors to take advantage of. Wait a minute. There's no Gandhi?
Bye-bye, Russia!
Having a weapon is very different from actually using it.
Hello, beautiful gamers. Thank y'all so much for watching my video. This was a lot of fun to make. Seriously. I wanted to get this video out before Civ 7 comes out. It should be out by then. But I did see the responses to the previous video on The Walking Dead, and I was pretty stoked to see that. I did not expect I do this as a hobby, like purely for fun, for my own purposes, for me, for Alejandro to express myself. And so waking up to like 20k views in one morning was kind of a plot twist for me, but that was awesome. So I definitely will be making a sequel to that video on the second season of The Walking Dead. So if you're coming off of that video and wanted to see more, first of all, appreciate you for watching that, putting up with my nonsense. But second of all, I will be making a video, so no worries there. But wanted to knock this out before Civ comes out just because it had thoughts on my brain that I wanted to get out. And here they are. Hope you liked it. Don't really have much to say or ask for. Just thank you for watching the videos, for watching this, for watching the other stuff. Look out for more. Bye, y'all.